Welcome to today's presentation on long-term care. Will the cost wipe out my savings? And this is a big question for a lot of people, right? As we continue to age, as we know a lot of our loved ones continue to age, this becomes a big question, right? How much money do we need to set aside? How much money do we need to have so that we can make sure that we last through any long-term cares that we're going to need. And so today we're going to talk about that. A little bit of housekeeping. Of course, we are recording this, and so I've put everybody on mute. And at the end, we'll have plenty of time for questions. I'll stop the recording, and you can ask your questions at that point. There will be a replay available. It will be posted on YouTube, and I'll also send you an email tomorrow that will just remind you that it's up and you can watch it. And if you have any questions, of course, give us a call. The goal for today isn't a sales pitch. It's a conversation starter. Make no mistake, I am an estate planning attorney. I want your business. I want to handle your estate planning, your powers of attorney, your guardianship, your probate. I want to do that. But the purpose of this presentation is not to sell you on those services, but merely to start this conversation about long-term care, why it's so important, and what we can do to prepare. I think throughout this presentation today, you're going to hear why this is such an important topic as we go through it. First, to start out, who are we? LifePlan Legal Arizona. We are an estate planning, probate, elder law firm serving Queen Creek, Gilbert, Santan, and the entire East Valley, Arizona. Our goal at LifePlan Legal is to help 10,000 families pass their values and their valuables to the next generation. Values before valuables. That is the LifePlan Legal difference. We start with your values. And that's why we think that what we have to offer is so important. We focus on education, planning, and protection. And really in that order. We start with education. We want everybody to have clarity and understanding of what we do. Then we put together a plan that protects not just during your life, but after your life so that your wishes and your desires continue on. All right, who am I? Most importantly, Jake Carlson. I own LifePlan Legal, but most importantly, I'm the husband and father of 3. You can see my kids there on the screen. I founded LifePlan Legal after 15 years as a tax attorney and a small business consultant. Just a quick walkthrough of my background. I graduated with a dual MBA JD and became an Arizona lawyer back in 2005. My law degree is in tax and estate planning, thus the estate planning attorney, and I have a master's in business administration in financing emerging enterprises, how to invest in companies as they're growing. My first job out of law school was as a tax attorney, as I mentioned, for a large national nonprofit, which sent me on the road. Literally every Monday morning, I got up, I caught an airplane. Every Friday night, I caught that airplane home, and I did that every single week. And what I did as this tax attorney for this nonprofit is I went around and I met with high net worth individuals and high net worth families. And we sat down, we talked about the estate planning process, about charitable giving, about tax avoidance. And one of the things that's interesting is as I sat down with these people who had tons of money, I realized that they had the same hopes, dreams, desires for their family that you and I have for ours. And that is, they want to give their kids opportunity. They want to give them the ability to do whatever they want to do in life, to have positive opportunities and to grow, but not so much that they'll ruin them. And they wanted to help them to understand what it took to become successful, what those values were that they grew and went through in life that created who they are, the successful person that they are. And so I took that understanding, that process, and created what we call the LifePlan Legal Family Vision, which is the opportunity of passing your values along with your valuables to the next generation. I mentioned I did that for 11 years. I spent 4 years as a small business consultant. And then in 2014, I started the podcast Family Before Fortune, building the life of your dreams with the people you love. And then in 2017, my second podcast, you can see both logos on the bottom of your screen there, Modern Leadership, where each week we interview authors, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders about how they built their business, and importantly, how their family plays a role in that business. If you haven't noticed yet, and so far, I'm really big on building the life of your dreams with the people you love, the family, and building this values-based plan that will stay with your family for generations after you pass, during your life, but also after you pass. All right. So our goal today, as I mentioned, we want to start the conversation. It's really too much to cover in the 45 minutes that we have planned today, because every person has different needs, different situations, different ages, different income levels, all of that. So what we really want to do is give a broad overview. Things like, what is long-term care? How will Medicare and Medicaid play into that? What's the current stats for those who are going to need long-term care, and potentially what could it cost us? And some ways that we can pay for long-term care, maybe some that we haven't thought of before. How to make sure you get a good deal or a good insurance policy if you decide to go down the long-term care insurance route. And then we're going to introduce Medicaid. In Arizona, we call it Altex, but we'll talk about that as well. Just to be clear, I don't sell any of these products. I don't sell insurance. I get no compensation for the things that we're going to talk about. So you might be asking, why? What's the purpose? Why are we going to talk about this today? I talk about this because it's an important part of aging, and aging with amazing. Aging with amazing is something that I'm passionate about. We're all going to age. And what are some of the things, the steps that we can take to make sure that that process is amazing for us? It can be confusing. I know there's so much information. There's a lot of misinformation. A lot of that misinformation I don't think is intentional. Really what I think is happening is there's so much information that plays in different circumstances. And because we're all different, and because all our circumstances are different, some of that information is misinformation for you in your certain circumstance. And so, of course, we want to offer you the free consultation. Give us a call. Let's talk through your situation and make sure that we've got everything properly set up. At the end of this, I want you to be able to say, I had fun. It was informative. He kept it a little bit lively. He wasn't boring. I know what I need to do next. I have some ideas of where to proceed and where to go. And my questions were answered. At least some of the general questions that you have. Of course, some of your more in-depth questions, after we hit the recording off, we'll take a look at some of those and see if we can answer them. We'll set up some consultation time and really talk through your specific questions as we move forward. All right, what is long-term care? Long-term care consists of numerous services that help individuals meet their care needs. For those with a chronic condition or a disability, long-term care provides medical and non-medical support. Long-term care can include help with daily tasks. You might have heard such things as bathing, eating, or dressing, as well as some personal tasks, maybe, for example, housekeeping, meal preparation, transportation to doctor's appointments, and assisting with basic communication. Really, long-term care encompasses all of this. It can be offered in your home. It can be offered in an assisted living facility. It can be offered in a nursing home. All of the needs as we age that are around our care, personal, individual, and also upkeeping our home and the things around us that are important. That is really what long-term care is. And so you may be asking, okay, well, doesn't Medicare cover it? And the answer is Medicare covers under certain circumstances. Medicare will help you pay for a short stay in a skilled nursing facility if you meet all three of the following requirements. Number one, you have to have a hospital admission with inpatient stay a minimum of 3 days. So 1 day, 2 days, not going to be enough for Medicare to cover your long-term needs. Number two, it needs to be at a Medicare certified nursing facility, and the need has to be within 30 days of that 3-day stay that you had hospital admission. And then the third one is you have to have this need for skilled care. So Medicare will not cover if you don't meet one of those three circumstances or conditions, not one of three, all three of those. And then further, it will only cover up to 100 days. After 100 days, you're going to need to use private insurance or another form of payment to cover. The other thing that it doesn't cover, and we're going to talk a little bit about this later, it does not cover Alzheimer's or dementia care, which is becoming such an important topic for us to talk about. And so that is why we need to talk about alternatives, not just Medicare, but some other ways that we can pay for it. Who's going to need long-term care? Well, currently there's 1.4 million Americans that are living in nursing homes. The Department of Health and Human Services estimates that 70% of those over age 65 are going to need some form of long-term care. 1 out of 5 seniors is going to need long-term care that lasts in excess of 5 years. So we're talking about a serious situation when it comes to long-term care. The average woman, according to the Department of Health and Human Services, will need 3.7 years of long-term care. The average man, 2.2 years, not living in assisted care or nursing home quite as long as the ladies do. Now, I told you I would talk a little bit about Alzheimer's, and so let me give you some statistics from the Alzheimer's Association. Every 70 seconds, someone is diagnosed with Alzheimer's. It's a serious issue. It's all around us. Currently, more than 5.8 million people are living with the disease, and that number is expected to grow to 14 million by 2050. So we see this increasing. It's sad to say that right now, Alzheimer's and dementia are the 6th leading cause of death. Sadly, 1 in 3 seniors dies with Alzheimer's or another form of dementia. So even though it is one of the highest leading causes of death, also there are a number of people that even though they are not passing away because of Alzheimer's and dementia, they are passing away with it. 1 in 3 seniors is what the Alzheimer's Association is estimating. So who's going to need long-term care? Probably all of us. Majority of us, a lot of us are going to need some form of long-term care. Now, that doesn't mean that it's going to be this 5 years or this 2.2 years or 3.7 years or whatever it may be. Each of us will have our different circumstances. But as I often like to say and joke, plan for the best, hope for the worst. No, opposite that. Plan for the worst, hope for the best. And that's what this conversation starter is all about. Okay. What's it going to cost? Well, Genworth's 2019 cost of care survey that went out showed that the national median for cost of care is about $280 a day or $102,000 for a year. As I mentioned, some people will stay shorter stays, some longer stays, but keep that in mind. We're looking at about $102,000 a year as the national median for the cost of care. Average IRA balances, by the way, 105,000, and this number was taken from September of 2019, before this COVID-19 and the stock market challenges that we've seen recently. So bottom line, as Stephen Wright puts so beautifully on the screen, you'll see, be nice to your children. After all, they are going to choose your nursing home. Some of you may have heard of financial guru Dave Ramsey. He shares this. Take a story of Joe and Susie, for example. They weren't always smart with their money, but they worked hard. They built up a nest egg. Let's call it 300,000. Joe turned 67, and guess what? Every 70 seconds, he develops Alzheimer's. At first, not too bad, right? His wife, Susie, she can take care of him. They use that nest egg to hire some home care specialists, spend some time with Joe. But as his condition worsened, it was apparent that he needed to go into full-time care. He needed to go into a nursing home. Sadly, after 5 years in the home, Joe passed away. Susie, now 72, healthy as can be, but she has to work full-time. Why does she have to work? Because she used her savings. She used their nest egg, that 300,000, to support her husband's stay at the nursing home. And it devoured almost all of that nest egg. Unfortunately, this story is not unique. It happens to many people every year. And so that's why I want to move to this next subject, which is, okay, what can I do today? Maybe it's before we've been diagnosed. Maybe I'm just kind of thinking for the future. What can I do today to prepare myself to make sure that I don't fall into a similar type of situation? So let's look at them. There are 10 ways that we can pay for, and there's probably a bunch more than this, but these are the most common. These are the ones that we want to talk about the most right now. Way number one that we can pay for long-term care is Social Security or pension, that guaranteed income that we have. So if we work during our life and we have a Social Security payment, that Social Security payment, which is guaranteed through our life, is going to cover hopefully some of the cost of long-term care. It might not cover all of it. Let's say that you're getting $2,000 a month from Social Security. Let's say that your long-term care is $5,000. Okay, we're offsetting about 40% of our costs. Now we can use some of the other 10 ways that are listed on the screen to pay for the other 60%. Certainly better than having to come up with 100% of that long-term care. So the very first place that we like to look is any guaranteed income that you have. Maybe you have a pension. I heard that some people still have those out there, or retirement accounts that can, this guaranteed income that will pay for it. The second one then is your IRAs, individual retirement accounts. Now, one of the challenges with using individual retirement accounts is that they increase your taxable income, right? When you take the money out of your tax-free account, your IRA, it creates this taxable event for you. However, on the flip side, your medical deduction might make this almost a tax-free health savings account. Basically, you put it in tax-free into the IRA, it grew tax-free, and even though you may be taxed on taking it out, because of the medical deduction, you can offset the taxes that you're paying on it. And this turns into almost a health savings account, which we'll talk about in number 6, which ironically or interestingly is my most favorite way to plan for long-term care. Now, I will add, I'm not a CPA, so you'll want to make sure that you talk with your accountant before doing some of these tax strategies. But I want you to be aware that using your IRA may have some positive benefits after it offsets the removal of it in the taxable income. Number 3, personal savings. This is what most people rely on. And my experience has been that most people hold their savings in one of two places: in real property, meaning in their home, or in their retirement accounts, which we talked about in number 2. They may have some side investments that they pulled aside, but for the most part, a majority of their net worth is held in one of those two places, in real property or in retirement investment accounts. And so as you consider using that, investing and looking to use those two categories as your long-term care, funding your long-term care, realize that it may be a challenge if you need, let's say, for example, your spouse to stay in that home. You may need long-term care, but your spouse may not. And so some of that money may not be accessible or as liquid as we may need it to be. And so keep that in mind, but this is probably the most popular way that people plan for long-term care is through their savings. Number 4, self-insure. This is where you can take a little bit of money today and put it aside in your own investment account and invest it with the intent that you're going to use it for long-term care. And it's kind of being your own, it's setting up your own kind of insurance policy, if you will. The risks with this is you don't know when and you don't know how much long-term care is going to cost. And there's this risk that you may not have enough at the time that you need it, or you may have too much. It's just, you got to balance what you have and what you're doing with it. And so, it is an option, and I wanted to bring it up. And I also want to share with you the risks, and just so you can plan for those. But that's number 4, a self-insure through just setting aside some money into an investment account. Number 5 is add a rider to an existing life insurance policy. And start by checking your policy. Adding this rider could increase the cost, maybe 5 to 10%. But some policies already have a standard rider for terminal illnesses or diagnosis with a cognitive impairment, or if you meet other criteria. You may find that your policy already has this in it, but start with checking your policy. After you check your policy, you could look at adding a rider to it. As I mentioned, it could increase the cost for you. It could be as low as 5 to 10%, which may be worthwhile, may be worth it for you. But that's number 5 in ways that we can pay for long-term care. Add a rider to an existing life insurance policy. Number 6, I told you this is my favorite. I love this one. health savings account. Current limits for a health savings account, you can contribute tax-free into your health savings account, $35.50 for an individual and $7,100 for a family, with a $1,000 annual catch-up if you're over 55 years old. So you could tuck away a little bit of money each year, starting at a young age, and planning to use that for your long-term care. What I love about this health savings account is money goes in tax-free, it comes out tax-free, and it grows tax-free. So it's really a great way to contribute some money. If you have, $7,100 for a family, $8,100 if you're over 85 or 55, put that into an account, a health savings account, invest it with the intent that you'll use it for any long-term care that you'll need. Now, keep in mind, you don't have to just choose one of these 10 ways. Each one of these can be used in coordination with another one. For example, we talked at the very beginning about Social Security. We talked about maybe Social Security can only cover 40% of your long-term care needs. Where are you going to get the other 60%? Well, your health savings account can cover some of it. Maybe if you have some other savings, or if you've got a IRA, you can use for some of that. Or we can bump to number 7 on the list, which is veterans benefits. Veterans, this is one that most people don't know about. Veterans who have served in a qualified period of conflict, as well as their spouses, are entitled to receive financial aid known as VA Aid and Attendance, or VA A&A, you may have heard it called, to help them pay for long-term care. So if you did serve in the military and you were at a time of qualified period of conflict, which a lot of 65 plus did because of the Korean War, because of Vietnam War, and because of Desert Storm, and the conflicts in the Middle East. If you did serve during those periods of time, you may want to look into some of these veterans benefits to help pay for some of your long-term care. Number 8, an annuity with a long-term care rider. And these are easier to get than long-term care insurance, which we're going to talk about in just a minute. They have less stipulations, less hoops to jump through to get there. The challenge is you have to pay up front. That's the challenge. Let's say you want a $50,000 annuity. Well, you got to put that $50,000 in to begin with. So that's number 8 on our list. All right, moving on. Number 9 and number 10, I'm going to talk about on their own separate slides because there's a little bit more to them than the first 8 that we discussed. Number 9 is long-term care insurance. Don't assume that this is financially out of your reach. A lot of experts will say that you want to start looking, if you're interested in long-term care insurance, around age 60 to 65. Some people would say if you start in your 50s, you pay less, and that's true, but you also pay longer. So there is kind of a balance between the right time to jump in and so on and so forth. AARP recommends, they call it the magic 5 years between 60 and 65. Dave Ramsey recommends 60 to 65. Susie Orman recommends that you start a little bit younger. She says in your 50s, you should start looking at long-term care insurance. It uses increases in taxable income, but I'm reading the wrong notes here, but let me move on to the next slide and that'll give us more notes. All right, here's our risk factors for long-term care. Cons: can be hard to get. I mentioned this with the annuity earlier. There are some hoops you got to jump through. If you have pre-existing conditions, you may not qualify for long-term care insurance. If you're above a certain age, you may not qualify for long-term care insurance. And therefore, one of the cons is that it could be hard to get. Risk factors when it comes to long-term care. It's cheapest when you don't need it. Isn't that the unfortunate thing? Right? It could be a multi-decade expensive gamble. Basically, if you start in your 50s and you're putting money into this long-term care insurance, and then you get into your 80s and you don't need it or you pass away, it could have been an investment that just didn't pan out for you. On the other hand, if you do need it, it could be this very wise investment decision that you made at a younger age. So those are a couple of things that you want to look at, weigh, and as you're discussing uh, long-term care insurance with an agent, I also recommend that you really go deep in this. Don't just read a brochure. Don't just listen to the salesman. Really read about it, understand it, figure out for your needs what makes the most sense. The reason I say this is because the pricing can be very complicated. It can depend on things like your age and your health, what triggers the benefit, meaning what type of diagnosis would equate into you receiving a benefit. How much is that daily benefit? We talked about 280 being the national mean for long-term care, $280 a day. How much is that daily benefit going to be? How long will you receive the benefit? Is it for a period of time? What if you need it for years at a time? How long until the payments kick in? Will you get a payment after 3 days, 30 days, 3 months? These are some of the things to really take a look at that affect the pricing and why it can be complicated. If you don't buy inflation protection, this is what I was mentioning on that last slide that got a little confusing. I got ahead of myself. But if you don't buy inflation protection, you may be paying into it today, and in the future, the cost of your medical care may not be covered by what you put in. And then finally, do the premium payments stop when the benefits start, or do you need to keep paying even though you're receiving benefits? All of these things, all of these are factors that play into the price of getting long-term care insurance. And because of the complexity, because of the cost, the insurance agencies represent that 10% of people who start with long-term care insurance usually drop out after the first year because it gets complicated, it gets expensive, and so then they just pass on it, which means that year they just paid into nothing. So really be intentional if you're going to go down this path of long-term care insurance. I mentioned before, I have no stake in this game. I don't sell insurance. I don't get any commission. So I just want you to be as informed as possible if this is one of the 10 ways that you're going to attempt to pay for your long-term care. Here's some additional considerations, how to know if you're getting a good policy, or things to or look at when you're looking at getting a good long-term care insurance policy. Will it cover cognitive impairment? As we talked about, every 70 seconds, 1 in 3 seniors is passing away currently with Alzheimer's or some form of dementia. It's out there. It's a reality. So make sure that when you get long-term care insurance, if you choose to go down this path, you make sure it covers cognitive impairment. Number 2, clearly define what the activities of daily living are. Examples of ADL or activities of daily living are things like bathing, dressing, moving around, transferring, eating. Most insurance policies require a minimum of 2 or more ADLs, impairment in 2 or more activities of daily living. So you really want to make sure you understand what those activities of daily living are and how many need to be impaired before your policy will kick in. Number 3, is there a cash value or option to cash out? Meaning, what if you die without using it? Can your estate cash out the policy because you never used it? Or in the future, if you need the cash, can you cash out, as we talked about on the last? Number 4, take difference between individual versus shared coverage. Coverage with you and your spouse tends to be a lot, it most often ends up cheaper than individual coverage. So you may want to look at that, getting a dual policy as opposed to an individual policy. Number 5, take a look at inflation protection and those premium increases that we talked about on the last page. 7, what is the claims process? What hoops do you need to jump through to get your claim, to show that you need to start receiving that benefit? Number 7, what is the maximum benefit pool in order to, how much benefits that you're going to be able to receive? Number 8, qualifying or waiting periods. How long till you receive benefits? Number 9, we talk about Goldilocks. And this will be the final consideration, and then we'll jump on to a new topic. But the Goldilocks is, When do you get long-term care insurance? We mentioned previously that AARP and Dave Ramsey, they recommend 60 to 65. Susie Orman says in your 50s. All three agree that after 65, it becomes more challenging and the benefit goes down. So this is really something that you want to start looking at while you're young, while you still have the opportunity to use as an option. Okay, so that is our conversation and discussion about long-term care insurance. That is number 9. Number 10, you'll recall, is Medicaid. Medicaid is a very hot topic right now. In fact, it is the fastest growing part of my business is elder law, or dealing with Medicaid and getting approved to use Medicaid for long-term care. Medicaid in Arizona is handled under, originally it was handled under AHCCCS, AHCCCS, the Arizona Healthcare Cost Containment System. You'll notice that the word containment in the name shows that the intention of this Medicaid is to contain the costs of long-term care. Eventually, they adjusted it to be specific ALTEX, which is in Arizona used kind of interchangeably. Arizona Long-Term Care System. Both of those, AHCCCS and ALTEX, are the Arizona equivalent of the federal program called Medicaid. So when all other options are extinguished, when we've exhausted all the previous 9 that we talked about, then we start talking about Medicaid. So let's start with a quick explanation. Medicaid is different from Medicare. Although many people by mistake, they may refer to the programs interchangeably. We talked about Medicare previously. It's an entitlement program paid through payroll withholdings. Medicaid is a form of social welfare designed to help people in need. Medicaid is designed to benefit the elderly, blind, or disabled, a welfare program available only to those who have insufficient assets or income to pay for their own care. Nationwide, if you look nationwide, Medicaid is paying for about 50% of all nursing home costs. The next on that list, and I mentioned this previously when we talked about the 10 ways to pay, is personal savings, personal income. These are Medicaid's paying for 50%, personal income is handling a major bulk of the other 50%. One question I often get is, can ALTEX provide in-home care? The answer is yes, but you get less for what you're paying for. So if you pay the same amount into a nursing home or a care facility, you'll get more benefits than at home. But yeah, the answer is, under certain circumstances, yes, ALTEX can be used to provide in-home care. Now, we mentioned that Medicaid is an income-based social welfare program. So the question is, what can I own or what can I have and still qualify for Medicaid in the state of Arizona? Well, one of the things that you can have is a home as long as the equity is below $500,000. So if you have a home and your equity is less than $500,000, you can still qualify for Medicaid. You don't need to sell your home. In Arizona, you can have an automobile. Actually, in Arizona, you can have an automobile worth any value. It doesn't have to be a certain valued automobile, but you can only have one. And then $2,000 in savings. Anything over $2,000 in savings will get you to not qualify for Medicaid. If you have $2,001, you will not qualify for Medicaid. And that's why it is often beneficial to work with an attorney, an elder law attorney, to make sure that your assets are in the right position so that you can qualify for the benefits. And we could do a whole presentation on why it's important to qualify for some of those benefits, particularly if you have a spouse that is going to remain after you go into long-term care or your loved one goes into long-term care. But that's a presentation for another day. By the way, household items do not count in the calculation. We're really looking at cash, investment accounts, retirement accounts, your home, your automobile, these larger ticket items. Obviously, these adjust a little bit if you're married, and that's why I mentioned, sit down with an attorney, walk through your specific circumstance to make sure that you don't get disqualified in a time when you might really need it. That's why Medicaid planning strategies should be put in place long before the potential need arises, so that you can make the adjustments and do the things that need to be done pre-needing them to be done. If you need to go into a nursing home or care facility tomorrow, there are things that we can sit down and do. But had we sat down previously and worked them out, there's a lot more options available to you. So I recommend getting an early jump on this, jumping in and finding out what works best for you. While you can't plan for the unforeseen as life expectancies continue to increase, it's fairly safe to assume that most of us are going to eventually require some form of long-term health care. And therefore, it's important that we start now to consider what our options are. And we just laid out 10 of those options. What are the biggest drawbacks of Medicaid? Number one is estate recovery laws, meaning that the state can come after your estate to gather up some of the money that they gave you through the social welfare program. There are ways to avoid that. I really suggest sitting down with an attorney and walking through it. And then not every facility, this is a second drawback that you're going to notice, not every facility accepts Medicaid patients. So you don't often get to choose where you want to live. And so there are a lot of facilities, there's a lot of beds in Arizona that you can choose from, but maybe the one that you want, the one you've got your heart set on, the one that you want your loved one to go to, they may not be a Medicaid accepting facility, and therefore you would have to use one of the other 9 options that we talked about previously. However, if you find one that is available for Medicaid patients, terrific. Then you work through the process of that, get qualified for Medicaid, and they'll cover that. Can my loved ones, I get this question a lot here, so let me just jump into it right now. Can my loved one be thrown out of nursing care if we run out of money? And the answer is generally yes. The facility is required to give the family a 30-day notice, typically, and a full medical report. But yeah, that's one thing that we get a lot of questions about, and so I thought I'd answer it just here on this webinar, that typically if you run out of money, typically the nursing home is able to what they call evict, same as a rental house under certain stipulations, 30-day notice and full medical report. All right, if you have additional questions about that, hold on until right after the webinar. We'll talk right through those specific circumstances with you. All right. Okay, so just a quick review of the 10 ways that we discussed. Social Security or pension, a guaranteed income, that's typically where we start. IRAs, retirement accounts, that's where we go to next. Personal savings, self-insuring, if you're in a position where you can put aside some money and invest it. We talked about the risks of not knowing when and how much you're going to need, and if you're going to be ready at the time you need it. Adding a rider to an existing life insurance, remember to start with looking at your current life insurance and see if there's already a rider on it for cognitive impairment or other terminal illnesses. Healthcare savings account, my favorite one, tax-free in, tax-free growth, tax-free out. In certain circumstances, number 9, I think, is a great one, but you got to start early. Obviously, if you're a veteran, look into the VA, and annuity with long-term care rider, not necessarily my favorite because you have to come up with money up front. And then if everything's extinguished, if you've used all the opportunities that you see listed from 1 to 9, let's sit down and talk about qualifying for Medicaid to make sure that you're taken care of as you age. And maybe as your health is declining and diminishing, this is a great way for you to make sure that you can age with amazing. All right, we talked about that. The other part of my business I mentioned earlier is estate planning. I do a different presentation on leaving a legacy and eliminating the 8 failures of estate planning. I've got one coming up next week, 1 week from today, Tuesday morning, 10 a.m. on this same Zoom channel. You can go to seminar.lifeplanlegalaz.com and sign up for that. They're free, and then we'll get you the emails and the links and everything that you need to join us. I will mention in closing just one piece from next week's presentation. I mentioned earlier, we start with your values. The number 5 failure of estate planning that we eliminate is this failure to include your values. And I'll tell you why it's so important. 90% of all problems with inheritance can be avoided if the parents would just speak with their children before they pass away. You know, even the Bible says, where there is no vision, the family perishes. Well, it says the people, but I say the family. Where there is no vision, where you have no planning for your values, for the things that made you who you are, that's when the family perishes. So one of the things we talk about in the presentation is identifying, recording, and sharing what you value, why it's important. And then we'll talk about the 5 family building activities: family fun, family education, family business, family stories, and family philanthropy. So if you want to learn more about that, join us next week on that free webinar on leaving a living legacy, creating a living legacy, and eliminating the 8 failures of estate planning. All right, next steps. Let me just share with you, I suggest the next step for you is to claim your free strategy session. You can do it by sending me an email. You can go on our website, az.com, secure a spot there. We have a calendar right there. Secure it. We can do it over the phone. We can do it on Zoom like we're doing right now. We can do it in person, of course, observing all of the social distancing and coronavirus regulations that we have right now to keep you and all your loved ones safe. And I want to tell you this. Thank you. Thanks for joining us on this webinar. And as a token of thanks, as gratitude for spending this 45 minutes with us today, I want to offer you $500 off our values-based revocable living trust, or $350 off the advanced will package, which includes all your powers of attorney. I often joke around when it comes to estate planning. Well, there's 2 things in life that you should never compromise on: packing your parachute and estate planning. You see, if you compromise on packing your parachute and then you jump out of that airplane and you realize that you compromised and you realize that you made a mistake, it's too late. The same thing happens with estate planning. When you compromise on estate planning, when you don't put in the time and the effort to make a true plan today, by the time you realize that your plan fails, it's too late. And so don't experience those challenges. Join us next week for the presentation. Give us a call. Take advantage of the offers that we've been giving you. And of course, stick around. As soon as I turn off the presentation, we'll jump into some of your specific questions and identify how best we can help you and your family. Thank you again for joining us on this important conversation of long-term care. Will long-term care wipe out my savings?